Welcome to the infamous edition of the Headstones and Microphones, where we use AI to step into the past through a researched first-person simulation done through creative storytelling of history's most infamous people. Now, let's meet our guest. Welcome to the podcast. Let's start at the absolute beginning, where the public narrative hasn't yet distorted who you were. When and where were you born? And what was your given name?
Hi, Calvin. If you want the real, absolute beginning, I came into this world on November 12th, 1934, right at the Cincinnati General Hospital in Ohio. Now, as for my name, my mother, Ada Kathleen Maddox, was only 16 years old and a bit overwhelmed. So my birth certificate initially didn't even have a first name. It just said, "No name Maddox." After a few weeks, she settled on Charles Mills Maddox. It wasn't until she briefly married a man named William Eugene Manson a few years later that I took the last name Manson, and it just stuck.
What was your hometown and home life like as a child?
My early life was a messy, wandering kind of existence, mostly centered around Ohio, West Virginia, and Indiana. My mother struggled heavily with alcoholism, and when I was just a little guy around 5 years old, she and her brother got sent away to prison for several years for armed robbery. I was bounced around to live with an aunt and uncle in McMeechin, West Virginia. When my mother finally got out, we had a brief window of what felt like happiness, but she went right back to the drinking and the drifting. By the time we hit Indianapolis, she just couldn't handle me anymore, and I was made a ward of the state.
Was there a story behind your name or a nickname that stuck with you?
Well, like I mentioned, the Manson part came from a stepfather I barely knew. But over the years inside the institutions, people called me Charlie. Later on, when things shifted out in California, the folks around me just referred to me as Charlie, or sometimes Jesus, God, or Soul. The media later minted the Charles Manson brand, but to the people who actually knew me in the day-to-day, I was just Charlie.
What were you like as a child, and how many years of schooling did you actually attend?
I was an incredibly restless, troubled kid, constantly running away from wherever they put me. Because of that, my schooling was practically non-existent. I was a chronic truant. When my mother handed me over to the state, I was sent to the Gibault School for Boys in Terre Haute, Indiana, which was a Catholic school for delinquents. I ran away from there within 10 months. After that, it was a revolving door of reformatories like the Indiana Boys School and the National Training School for Boys in Washington, D.C. I spent my childhood learning from the inside of walls rather than from standard textbook.
What's a decision that changed everything for you, but felt small at the time?
When you're a kid surviving on the streets after running away from a home or an institution, you make small choices just to get by. For me, it was the choice to steal to keep myself afloat. I started breaking into grocery stores and shops, and eventually I made the choice to steal a car.
Let's talk about your early run-ins with the law. Before the world knew your name for your most infamous actions, what was your very first arrest or interaction with law enforcement, and what were the consequences?
My very first official run-in with law enforcement happened when I was just 13 years old. I broke into a grocery store to steal, and that burglary landed me right in a juvenile correctional facility in Omaha, Nebraska. But I couldn't stay put. I escaped from there, went right back to robbing stores, and wound up sent to the Indiana Boys School. That kicked off a cycle where I spent 18 of the next 20 years locked up in various institutions and federal reformatories.
At what moment did you realize your name would never be forgotten?
It really hit a peak during the trial in 1970. I walked into that courtroom on the very first day, and the entire room gasped because I had carved a bloody X right into my forehead. I released a statement to the press saying I had X'd myself out of the establishment's world. When the media went into an absolute feeding frenzy over that, and then my followers showed up the next week with X's carved into their own heads to match mine, I knew the image and the narrative were locked into the national consciousness forever.
Did fame make you more dangerous, or did it simply expose who you already were?
The media and the prosecution built up this image of a criminal mastermind, but the truth is, the institution life is what shaped me. I spent my developmental years in federal joints, learning the rules of survival, how to manipulate, and how to read people. When I got out in 1967 into the middle of the San Francisco counterculture, The environment changed, but the survival instincts I learned on the inside just adapted to the outside world.
Who do you believe betrayed you first? A person, society, or your own instincts?
If we are talking about the legal downfall, it was the people closest to me who turned. Linda Kasabian was the key. She was there, she saw everything, and she became the prosecution's star witness, testifying for days in exchange for immunity. Susan Atkins also talked to her cellmates, which blew the whole case wide open. They gave the state exactly what it needed to tie everything back to me.
What was your most unique habit or a random fact about you that would surprise people?
People might be surprised by how obsessed I was with music while I was in federal prison in McNeil Island. I took guitar lessons from an old inmate named Alvin Karpus, who used to be part of the Barker gang. I practiced constantly and wrote hundreds of songs. When I got out, my entire focus was trying to become a professional musician, and I even spent time hanging out and sharing music with Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys.
What did the public never understand about the pressure you were under at the time?
During the trials, I tried to explain to the court that the public was looking at a mirror of their own creation. I didn't have the education or the background of the lawyers and judges. I tried to represent myself because I felt no one else could speak for my reality. I felt the pressure of a system that had already decided who I was based on books and rules, while I was operating entirely on the reality of the streets and the joint.
Did you have any known rivalries that defined your career?
My main adversary was Vincent Bugliosi, the chief prosecutor for the state. He was determined to convict me, and he formulated the entire helter-skelter motive, this theory that I was trying to spark an apocalyptic race war based on my interpretation of the Beatles' White Album. It became a personal battle of narratives in that courtroom between his legal theory and my perspective.
What personal battles were you fighting privately while the world was watching?
Privately, I was fighting the legal system just to have my voice heard. I didn't want the defense attorneys the state forced on me, and I spent a massive amount of energy arguing with the judges just to get permission to speak or to substitute my lawyers, even threatening to cause as much trouble as possible if I wasn't allowed to represent myself.
When the law finally closed in, how exactly were you brought to justice? Walk me through the final arrest, the charges that ultimately stuck, and the legal outcome of your trials.
The law actually closed in on us out at Barker Ranch in a remote part of Death Valley in October 1969. The officers didn't even raid the ranch for the murders initially. They picked us up on charges of arson and grand theft auto. I was actually found hiding inside a small cabinet beneath a sink. Eventually, the connection was made, and I was charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder for the Tate LaBianca deaths. In 1971, the jury found me guilty on all counts. I was sentenced to death, but the very next year, the California Supreme Court ruled the death penalty unconstitutional. So my sentence was commuted to life in prison.
What's the craziest rumor ever told about you, and what part of your story has been exaggerated the most?
The grand narrative that I sat down and meticulously engineered every single second of a complex, prophetic war called Helter Skelter has been highly sensationalized over the decades. The media took the wildest elements of the counterculture, the drugs and the lifestyle, and spun it into a comic book villain story that overshadowed the messy, chaotic reality of what was actually happening on the ground.
What is the biggest misconception people have about your life?
The biggest misconception is that I was an outsider who just appeared out of nowhere to disrupt society. The truth is, I was a direct product of the American state institution system. I was raised by your reformatories, your foster homes, and your federal penitentiaries. I didn't learn how to live from the hippies. I learned how to live from the prison system.
When, where, and how did you pass away?
My journey came to an end on November 19th, 2017. I passed away from natural causes, specifically suffering from acute cardiac arrest and respiratory failure brought on by colon cancer. It happened at a hospital in Bakersfield, located in Kern County, California, while I was still serving out my life sentence.
Charlie, do you have any closing remarks about the interview or the stories you shared that you would like to share with the listeners before signing off?
Just that people always want to look at the monster in the cage, but they never want to look at the cage itself. History, writes the story the way it wants to write it. But the past is a lot more complicated than a few headlines. Thanks for letting me speak my piece, Calvin.
And that wraps up another conversation from Beyond the Grave. Thanks for joining us on the Headstones and Microphones podcast. Remember, do better with the life you have been given and choose to do good in this life. Please help spread the word by sharing and following the pod.